The Galactic Council chamber was vast, an immense sphere of polished crystal, with towering columns that stretched beyond the reach of the eye. Hundreds of different species filled the space, their forms alien and strange, each one a representative of a unique civilization. Their voices rang in a dissonant chorus, a blend of languages both beautiful and harsh, but the counselors all spoke one universal language: power. At the center of this celestial gathering was the Great Table, a floating platform that hovered above the ground, a symbol of the equality, or lack thereof, that existed within the council. The table was long and circular, made of a gleaming, reflective metal that shimmered under the light of a dozen stars visible through the transparent dome above. The council members, representing races that had advanced far beyond the human race, sat in their designated spots, their elongated forms draped in robes that glowed faintly with bioluminescence. This was the heart of galactic diplomacy, where the fates of millions of worlds were decided. Humanity's delegation stood at the edge of the chamber, a small but determined group. A few diplomats, a couple of scientists, and one representative who, though new to politics, had come to represent the hopes of every person on Earth. His name was Edward Moore, a young man with dark skin and a sharp mind, but even his intelligence could not hide the sense of unease that radiated from him. He had been chosen for this mission to the council not for his political experience, but for his passion, his conviction that humanity had something worth offering to the greater galactic community. Beside him stood Dr. Sophia Harrow, a renowned scientist who had worked on the creation of advanced energy technology that could revolutionize the galaxy. And then there was Dr. Tanika Selden, a human archaeologist who had discovered ancient, almost forgotten technologies on Earth, artifacts that hinted at the lost knowledge of long-extinct civilizations, some of which were far older than the Galactic Council itself. These were the people chosen to speak on behalf of humanity. But as the counselors gathered to deliberate, it became clear that their efforts would not matter. The chamber fell silent as the head counselor, a being named Kresh, a towering figure with the appearance of a crystalline spider, addressed the room. His voice, deep and resonant, echoed throughout the space. We have listened to the representatives of Earth, their claims, and their technologies. But it is clear to this council that humanity is not yet ready to join the galactic family. A murmur rippled through the room. The representatives from Earth exchanged glances, but none spoke. Kresh's voice continued, unwavering and filled with disdain. Your species has shown promise, but you are far too young, far too primitive. The decision is final. Earth will not be granted a seat on the council. Edward's breath caught in his throat. He had known this might happen, but hearing the council reject humanity so plainly, so cruelly, struck him like a physical blow. His eyes darted to the faces of the other humans in the room. Sophia looked as if she might burst with indignation, while Tanika's face was tight with barely controlled anger. But it was Edward who felt the weight of the decision most keenly. He had given everything to this mission, and now, everything seemed to be slipping through his fingers. Do not be alarmed, Kresh continued. Your species may still have a place in the galaxy, but not here. Not yet. You are not prepared to join the greater community of species. He turned to the other counselors, his many eyes glinting. Until then, we suggest that Earth remain in its isolation. Your world may develop further, but your civilization has yet to prove it is capable of the responsibility that comes with membership in this council. The words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, the chamber was eerily still. Edward felt the rush of heat rise in his chest. His thoughts flashed back to Earth, to the countless hours of work, the sacrifices made by millions of people who had contributed to the advancements that brought humanity to this point. And now, they were being dismissed without a second thought. He glanced at Sophia, who was trembling with barely contained fury, and then at Tanika, whose calm expression betrayed nothing of the deep frustration she must have been feeling. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could utter a single word, Kresh raised one of his many arms. Enough. We have heard enough. The decision is made. Your rejection will cost you, Edward finally managed to say, his voice a low growl. The words slipped out before he could stop them. The silence in the chamber grew even heavier, as if every being in the room was holding their breath. Crush's many eyes narrowed, focusing on Edward. The council's attention turned to the humans, who now stood at the center of the chamber. "And what exactly do you mean by that, human?" Crush's voice was as cold as the stars themselves. Edward took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "You have underestimated us. The consequences of rejecting humanity will be felt across the galaxy." His voice was steady, even though his heart pounded in his chest. He knew the risks of making such a declaration, but he couldn't hold back. This was more than just a political snub, it was a direct challenge to humanity's very existence in the galaxy. Crush laughed, a sound that reverberated through the chamber like the scraping of metal on stone. "You think your world is so important that we would fear the consequences of your rejection? You are nothing more than an insignificant blip in the grand scheme of the universe. You cannot threaten us, human." Edward's mind raced. The truth was, he knew this rejection was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. The Galactic Council had not just rejected Earth, they had written off humanity's potential. But what the Council didn't realize was that Earth had more to offer than they could possibly comprehend. Behind Edward, the holographic projection of Earth shifted, displaying images of human achievements, the construction of towering cities, vast technological breakthroughs, and even humanity's first steps into space. All these accomplishments were now being brushed aside, dismissed as insignificant. A chill ran through Edward's spine. If they didn't recognize humanity's worth now, they would soon regret it. But how? How could they make the Council see what they had overlooked? The Council was vast, its members scattered across countless star systems. How could one human, even one as determined as he, change the course of history? As the chamber slowly emptied, and the Council's final words echoed in his mind, Edward felt the weight of the future pressing down on him. The Council might have rejected humanity, but Earth would not go quietly into the dark. The war for Earth's place in the galaxy had only just begun. Edward Moore's mind raced as he and the rest of Earth's delegation left the Galactic Council chamber. The weight of their rejection was palpable, heavy in the air. He had hoped for a diplomatic breakthrough, a chance to show the Council what humanity was capable of. Instead, they had been dismissed like insects squashed beneath the boots of an indifferent giant. But what really stung was the certainty in Crush's voice. The Council wasn't just rejecting humanity, they were belittling it. The deep hum of the galactic transport ship was the only sound as it drifted through the silent corridors of the embassy, a solitary space in the vastness of the Council's headquarters. The humans aboard the vessel were quiet, each lost in their own thoughts, each reeling from the insult they had just received. Dr. Sophia Harrow sat across from Edward, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was flushed with frustration, her mind likely racing with ideas for retaliation. Tanika Selden, however, seemed calmer, though her usually composed demeanor masked a simmering anger. "We'll get them next time," Edward murmured, though even he wasn't sure what he meant by that. Tanika raised an eyebrow. "You think there will be a next time? They've dismissed us outright." Sophia's eyes flickered with an intensity that matched her words. "We can't just walk away from this. This isn't just political, this is a statement, a declaration that we have no place among them. That we're not worthy." Edward was about to respond when the communication panel on the ship's dashboard flashed to life. A strange sequence of symbols, followed by a deep, resonant voice, filled the cabin. "We have news for you. It's urgent." Sophia's eyes widened. She hurried to the panel. "Who is this?" A strange alien face appeared on the screen, an otherworldly figure with glistening violet skin and eyes that seemed to shimmer like stars. "I am Captain Iros of the Earth's Advanced Research League. I need to speak with all of you immediately." Edward's curiosity piqued. "What is it?" "I'm not sure how to explain this in a way you'll understand," Captain Iros said, the unease in their voice clear. "But your artist, the one who created the paintings you've been showcasing to the Council, there's something important you need to know about them." Edward's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't heard anything about an artist's works being of significance in the diplomatic mission. "What about them? Who's this artist?" Their name is D'Angelo Glover. And they're far more important than you think. D'Angelo Glover. The name rolled off Edward's tongue like a forgotten whisper, but it was clear this was no ordinary artist. The message continued, detailing the existence of a black artist from Earth whose works had captured the attention of some very influential entities, some far beyond the borders of the solar system. Captain Iros explained that these paintings weren't just pieces of art, they were strange and significant in ways the Earth delegation hadn't fully understood. Edward sat back, absorbing the information as it sank in. How does this tie into our current predicament? He asked, his voice full of confusion. How does an artist's work relate to the Council's rejection of Earth? The paintings D'Angelo creates are unusual, Captain Iros said, their voice grave. They depict future events, things that haven't happened yet, but they show visions of potential realities. In a way, they possess a power that goes beyond mere artistry. In the right hands, they could influence the galaxy in ways you can't even imagine. Tanika's eyes narrowed. Wait, you're telling us that Earth's future could somehow be in the hands of this artist? And this has been kept from us? Captain Iros nodded solemnly. Yes. But there's more. D'Angelo's work has already been recognized by some factions within the Galactic Council, though not by the Council itself. These factions believe that Earth's potential, depicted through D'Angelo's art, is something the entire galaxy should fear. The room fell silent as the enormity of the statement settled in. Edward thought back to the council meeting. Kresh had dismissed them so easily. And now, an Earth artist, whose works were barely known outside of niche art circles on Earth, could hold the key to humanity's place in the galaxy? The idea seemed outlandish at first, but then he considered it. If these paintings held visions of the future, if they were somehow able to predict or reveal potential realities, then the Council had no idea what they were dealing with. Humanity wasn't just another species, they were capable of something extraordinary. What do we do now? Sophia's voice broke through the heavy silence. Edward was already standing. We need to meet this artist. We need to understand what these paintings are really about. If they hold the key to humanity's future in the galaxy, then we need to use them. We'll take this directly to the Council. But before they could make plans to seek out D'Angelo Glover, Captain Iros sent them a final piece of information that sent a chill down Edward's spine. D'Angelo is not aware of the full extent of their own power, Captain Iros said softly. And there are others in the galaxy, rival factions, that are actively seeking to get their hands on these paintings. The wrong hands could use this power to incite war. The threat of galactic war hung heavily in the air, and Edward felt the weight of responsibility fall squarely on his shoulders. This artist, whom the Earth government had never heard of, might hold the key not just to their future, but to the future of the entire galaxy. As the ship continued on its course back to Earth, Edward felt a surge of urgency flood through him. Earth wasn't just a backward planet anymore. They had something unique, something no one had even realized until now. They had an artist who could shape the future. And now, Edward and the rest of the delegation had to find him before the Council did. Or worse, before someone else did. The descent back to Earth was a blur for Edward Moore. The urgency that had been building within him during the trip was now a sharp, constant hum in the back of his mind. Everything he thought he knew about humanity's place in the galaxy was suddenly being turned upside down. A single artist, a black man from Earth named D'Angelo Glover, was now the fulcrum upon which the balance of power in the galaxy could shift. Sitting in the small meeting room aboard the diplomatic shuttle, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that the Council's dismissal of humanity wasn't just a political move, it was a desperate attempt to keep Earth in check, to keep them from realizing their true potential. D'Angelo's paintings, they had learned, were not just beautiful or thought-provoking, they were prophetic, capable of visualizing alternate realities, potential futures, and, in some cases, outcomes that hadn't even begun to unfold. If the Council knew about this, they feared it. But Edward didn't have the luxury of just marveling at the discovery. They had to act fast. The factions in the galaxy that wanted D'Angelo's work were already making their moves. Rival power brokers, likely aware of the significance of the artist's creations, were already making plans to acquire or silence him. The danger was imminent. Do we even know where to find him? Tanika's voice broke through Edward's thoughts. They had been in contact with Captain Iros, who had assured them that D'Angelo Glover's location was known, but they didn't have the resources to locate him on their own. The artist had kept a low profile, selling his works on Earth in obscure galleries, far from the mainstream, far from the eye of any collectors who might have understood their true power. Only a few rare individuals had seen the full depth of what D'Angelo's paintings could do, and now, those individuals were mostly dead, silenced by those who feared the knowledge his work possessed. We can't risk waiting any longer, Sophia said, her voice laced with impatience. Every second we delay, someone else gets closer to him. We need to act. Edward turned to the holographic screen that displayed a map of Earth. There were countless art galleries, small venues, and private collectors scattered across the planet. It would be nearly impossible to track D'Angelo down without specific information. But he wasn't ready to give up just yet. The answer had to be closer than they realized. We need to find where he's been exhibiting his work. Start with the art scene, Edward said. D'Angelo must have shown his paintings somewhere. The people who've seen them may have an idea of where he is now. Sophia nodded. I'll dig through the records from every major art event in the last few years. He has to have left a trace somewhere. Tanika looked skeptical, but she didn't say anything. She was as committed as the rest of them to finding the artist. But there was something else on her mind, a quiet unease that Edward couldn't place. They were all in uncharted waters now. As the shuttle finally entered Earth's atmosphere, the weight of the situation pressed down harder on Edward's chest. Earth had been dismissed by the Galactic Council, but the rejection was far from the end of their story. No, this was only the beginning of something far greater. Humanity was about to uncover the secret power hidden within its own species. The message the Council had sent, that humanity wasn't yet ready, had been a grave mistake. It wasn't just technology or diplomacy that Earth needed to join the greater galactic community. It was the unquantifiable potential that humanity carried within itself. And now, with the discovery of D'Angelo Glover's prophetic paintings, Earth's true strength was finally being revealed. Edward and his team had always thought Earth was a fledgling species, just beginning to take its first steps into the galaxy. But now they realized that humanity had already planted the seeds of greatness long before they even knew it. The key to unlocking that potential lay in the hands of a single artist. They landed at the embassy compound, and the moment their feet touched the ground, Sophia went to work, calling in every resource she could muster. It was clear that they needed someone on the inside of the art world to understand the depth of D'Angelo's influence. She quickly gathered a team of researchers and art historians who specialized in underground movements and obscure artists. The first piece of information they uncovered was a shock. D'Angelo's name was already well known in certain circles, though not in the way anyone would have expected. His works were rare and deeply coveted, not by high-profile collectors, but by a select group of individuals, people who held significant influence in galactic politics. The artist had been making subtle ripples in the art world for years, but his true power had been masked by the seemingly chaotic nature of his creations. It was at a small gallery in New York that D'Angelo's paintings first started to gain real traction. The show had been hosted in an old, dilapidated warehouse that was mostly ignored by the mainstream art scene. The gallery was small, its walls adorned with works that seemed, at first glance, like nothing more than abstract expressions of color and shape. But as the paintings began to be studied more closely, it became apparent that they were not merely art, they were portals to something greater. One painting, in particular, had been the center of much speculation, a swirling mass of colors that seemed to shift depending on the viewer's perspective. The longer one stared at the painting, the more it seemed to change. And with each change, new visions of the future emerged. Some were peaceful, depicting human civilization thriving in the stars. Others, however, were chilling, a vision of a galaxy in flames, with Earth at the center, burning. The gallery owner, a man named Jasper Van, had mocked the paintings at first, dismissing them as nothing more than the incoherent ramblings of an untrained artist. He had no idea what he was dealing with. D'Angelo's work was worth millions, though Van had never recognized its true value. And when the artist's growing fame began to draw attention, Van had grown possessive of the paintings, hiding them from any serious buyers. But it was too late. Those in power, aware of the artist's growing influence, had started to make their moves. Some had offered D'Angelo large sums of money for his works, hoping to control the narratives of the future his paintings depicted. Others, more sinister, had simply taken the works, hiding them away in secret vaults, hoping to use them for their own gain. Edward realized, with a sense of dread, that D'Angelo Glover was not just an artist. He was a catalyst, a force that could change the course of the galaxy's future. But would D'Angelo understand the full weight of what his paintings had unlocked? And if he did, would he be willing to share that power with humanity, or would he be tempted by those who sought to use it for darker purposes? The team worked tirelessly through the night, gathering all available intel on D'Angelo's whereabouts, his works, and the people who had sought to possess him. By morning, they had a breakthrough. "Edward," Sophia said, her voice sharp and urgent as she burst into the room. "We found him." Edward stood up quickly, his heart pounding. "Where?" "San Francisco," Sophia replied. "It looks like he's been living under an alias. But we have a location, and it's not far." Edward's pulse quickened. D'Angelo Glover was the key to humanity's future. The council had rejected them, but now they had a chance to turn the tables. It was time to confront the artist, and the power that lay hidden in his art. San Francisco had always been a city of contrasts, tech hubs and historic landmarks, the Golden Gate stretching across the bay and the fog rolling in like a shroud. It was the perfect place for someone who wished to remain hidden in plain sight. Edward Moore stood at the edge of the city, staring out across the bay, as he and the delegation prepared to meet the artist who held humanity's future in his hands. The meeting had been arranged through one of Sophia's contacts, an old acquaintance who had ties to underground art dealers. The location of D'Angelo Glover's studio had been carefully concealed, a place where he could create in peace without the prying eyes of those who sought to exploit his talent. Edward felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he approached the unassuming warehouse near the industrial district of San Francisco. It looked like any other abandoned building, its windows covered in dust and graffiti. But behind its derelict facade was a hidden world, an artist's sanctuary, a place where visions of the future were brought to life. Sophia and Tanika flanked him as they approached the entrance. The door was unlocked, though it felt oddly inviting, as if they had been expected. The moment they stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. It was as if time itself slowed within these walls. The air was thick with the scent of fresh paint and old canvases. The flickering light of ancient lamps cast long shadows, stretching across the vast, high-ceilinged room filled with paintings. But it was the paintings themselves that drew Edward's gaze. Each piece was a masterpiece, but unlike anything he had seen before. The brushstrokes were chaotic, yet deliberate. Swirls of colors formed strange patterns, fractal shapes that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. And as he stared at the paintings, something inside him stirred. The room seemed to hum, resonating with a frequency that was both unsettling and captivating. There were no descriptions of the paintings on the walls, no titles or explanations. It didn't need them. The art spoke for itself, pulling viewers into its depths, inviting them to lose themselves in the visions it held. Edward felt a strange pull to one particular painting, a swirling depiction of the galaxy, vibrant and alive, teeming with stars. At the center was Earth, but it was not the Earth he knew. This Earth was united, its cities shining like beacons across the surface. And surrounding the planet were countless ships, human-made, but with designs he'd never seen before. He was so transfixed by the painting that he didn't notice the figure standing in the doorway behind him. "Pretty stunning, huh?" The voice was calm, deep, and warm. It startled Edward, but he didn't turn around. He had already known the artist was here, had known even before he'd laid eyes on him. D'Angelo Glover stepped into view, tall and slender, with dark skin that gleamed under the dim light. His eyes were bright, almost too bright, like twin stars that had seen too much. His expression was calm, as though he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. "I see you found my work," D'Angelo said, his voice holding a quiet intensity. Edward finally turned to face him. "It's incredible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But there's something more to it, isn't there?" D'Angelo smiled, but it wasn't a smile of pride. It was more like a knowing smirk, as though he could see the questions racing through Edward's mind before they even formed. "You've seen what it shows, haven't you?" D'Angelo asked. "The future." Edward's heart raced. "How did you know?" "I've seen them too," D'Angelo replied simply. "I've seen what my paintings can do. I didn't know how, at first. But then I started to realize, they're not just paintings. They're windows. Windows to possibilities, to futures that could happen. Some of them are beautiful. Others," he paused, his gaze darkening, "others are terrifying." Tanika stepped forward, her arms folded across her chest. "You don't even know the full extent of it, do you? The Galactic Council has taken an interest in your work. They've been trying to acquire your paintings for years." D'Angelo's eyes flickered with a hint of surprise. "The Council? Why?" Sophia took a step closer, her voice firm. "Your art doesn't just depict the future, it can shape it. The Council has rejected humanity, dismissed us as too young, too unstable. But what they don't know is that humanity has something they can't control, something they don't even understand." She glanced at Edward. "You, D'Angelo, are the key." D'Angelo's expression remained neutral, though something in his eyes seemed to shift. "I don't know what you're talking about. I just paint what I see." Edward stepped forward, his voice filled with urgency. "But your paintings, they show Earth's future in the stars. They show humanity not just surviving, but thriving. These visions, they're real. They could be our path to breaking through the Council's rejection. We need your help." D'Angelo took a long breath, clearly wrestling with the weight of the situation. He had always kept his work in the shadows, creating for himself, for the few who recognized its beauty. The idea that his paintings could have such a profound impact, on Earth, on the galaxy, on the future itself, was overwhelming. "I didn't ask for any of this," D'Angelo said quietly. "I didn't ask to be involved in whatever cosmic battle is unfolding. I'm just a man with a paintbrush." Edward reached out, his voice soft but insistent. "But you have the power to change everything, D'Angelo. The Council doesn't realize it, but your work is the key. They think humanity isn't ready, that we're too weak. But they've underestimated us. You've shown us our potential. It's up to us to make sure the galaxy sees it too." D'Angelo stared at Edward for a long moment, as if weighing the consequences of what he might say next. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping in resignation. "All right," he said, his voice tinged with reluctant resolve. "I'll help. But understand this, if we're going to challenge the Council, if we're going to change things, there's no turning back. I've seen the dangers. I've seen what happens when the wrong people get hold of this power. If we go down this path, we have to be prepared to face the consequences." Edward nodded, his resolve solidifying. "We're ready." Sophia, Tanika, and Edward exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. They weren't just representing humanity anymore. They were representing something greater, a new era, an unknown future, and the possibility that humanity's place in the galaxy was not as insignificant as the Council had once believed. D'Angelo's work could be the bridge that connected humanity to the stars, and now they had to make sure it didn't fall into the wrong hands. The galaxy's fate was uncertain, but they would not let the Council's rejection define their future. The news spread quickly through their small team. D'Angelo Glover had agreed to join their cause. But with his acceptance came the realization that the stakes had grown higher than any of them had anticipated. His prophetic paintings were more than just visual representations of possible futures, they were maps, blueprints of what could be, or perhaps what must be. The future was malleable, shaped by choices, and D'Angelo's art could influence those choices in ways humanity had yet to fully grasp. Edward, Sophia, and Tanika had returned to the Earth Embassy, with D'Angelo in tow. The once impersonal, sterile offices now felt alive with the hum of anticipation. D'Angelo's arrival brought with it a certain weight, a quiet but undeniable presence. The walls of the embassy, which had once echoed only with bureaucracy and political maneuvering, now seemed to pulse with purpose. But despite the gravity of their mission, there was no time for contemplation. Their first step was clear: get D'Angelo's paintings into the hands of those who could help, those who understood the significance of what he had created. The paintings needed to be presented in front of the right people, the ones who had the power to make change on a galactic scale. But the question remained, who could they trust? "We need allies," Sophia said as they sat around a conference table, D'Angelo seated at the head. "The council might have rejected us, but there are factions out there, other governments, independent leaders, or even rogue traders, that could be convinced. If we show them what D'Angelo's work can do, we could shift the balance of power." Edward nodded, his mind already racing through the possibilities. The galaxy was vast, filled with different races, cultures, and alliances, each with its own interests. Some would welcome humanity with open arms, seeing potential in the species that others would only dismiss as raw and untamed. Others, however, would see humanity's rise as a threat, something to be destroyed or manipulated for their own purposes. "There's one group I know we can trust," Tanika said, her voice cool and controlled as always. "The Independent Systems Collective. They've been looking for a way to challenge the Council's authority for years. If we show them D'Angelo's paintings, they'll want to ally with us." Edward raised an eyebrow. "The ISC? They're a bit radical, aren't they? They don't always play by the rules." Tanika smirked. "The rules didn't get us anywhere with the Council. The ISC knows how to get things done. They'll understand what's at stake." D'Angelo, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. His voice was calm, yet there was a hint of uncertainty in it. "I'm not sure I'm ready for all of this. I didn't ask for this power. I didn't ask to be part of whatever galactic chess game you all are playing." Edward looked at D'Angelo, his gaze steady and reassuring. "You're not just an artist anymore. Your work is too important. If we don't act, if we don't use it, someone else will, someone who doesn't care about the consequences." D'Angelo's eyes flickered with hesitation, but he nodded slowly. "All right. But just know, this is not going to be easy. I've seen the future, and there are those who will do anything to keep it from happening." Sophia, who had been gathering information from her sources, chimed in. "We've already seen some of that. There are factions trying to get their hands on your work. Some want it for political leverage, others for power, and a few, for something darker. We'll have to be careful." As if on cue, a communication terminal beeped. Edward's heart skipped a beat as he glanced at the screen. A message had come through from Captain Iros. "It's urgent," Edward said as he activated the transmission. The familiar face of Captain Iros appeared on the screen, their expression tense. "Edward, we've uncovered something. It's bad." Edward's mind raced. "What is it?" "There's a new player in the game," Captain Iros said, their voice tight with worry. "A faction that's been working in the shadows, quietly gathering strength. They've caught wind of D'Angelo's paintings, and they're moving quickly. They've got operatives on the ground, and we believe they're already in contact with some of the highest-ranking members of the Galactic Council." Sophia's face hardened. "Who are they?" "They're calling themselves the Order of the Unseen," Captain Iros replied. "Their goal is simple: to maintain the current balance of power in the galaxy. They believe that certain truths, like the kind D'Angelo's paintings reveal, are too dangerous. They'll do anything to keep them hidden." Edward felt a chill run down his spine. "How did they find out about us?" "We're not sure yet," Captain Iros admitted. "But they've been following your movements closely, Edward. They know what you're planning, and they're preparing to stop you before you can make any real progress. Tanika's eyes narrowed. So, they've been tracking us from the beginning. They've been waiting for the right moment to strike. Captain Iroh nodded gravely. Exactly. And they're not just interested in the paintings. They're after D'Angelo himself. D'Angelo's face was unreadable, but there was an unmistakable flicker of concern in his eyes. What do they want with me? Control, Captain Iroh replied. They want to control the future that your paintings show. If they get their hands on them, they'll have the power to manipulate the galaxy in ways that we can't even imagine. And they won't hesitate to do it. Edward's blood ran cold. He had known that the power D'Angelo's art possessed was immense, but to hear that there were those who would stop at nothing to seize it was terrifying. Then we can't waste any more time, Edward said, standing abruptly. We need to move quickly. We need to get D'Angelo's work out there, before the Order can get to it. Sophia stood as well, her eyes hard with determination. We need to move our allies into place. If we can get the ISC on our side, they can help us expose the Order. We can't let them control the future. D'Angelo glanced at the group, a sense of resolve slowly overtaking the uncertainty. All right. If we're doing this, I'm all in. But we do it my way, no one controls the future. Not them, not anyone. Edward smiled, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. That's the spirit. Let's take the fight to them. With a new sense of urgency, the team set their plan in motion. They would contact the ISC, present D'Angelo's paintings, and secure an alliance that would give them the strength they needed to stand up to the Order of the Unseen. The battle for the future had begun. But as they prepared to leave the embassy, a new message came through, this one marked as urgent. Edward felt a knot form in his stomach as he read the text on the screen. They've found D'Angelo. They're coming for him. The urgency of the situation became immediately clear. D'Angelo's name was now known far and wide, and with it, the power his art held. The Order of the Unseen wasn't just interested in controlling his paintings, they were determined to capture him. In their eyes, he was the key to unraveling the future, and they would stop at nothing to bend that future to their will. Edward's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the warning message on the terminal. They've found D'Angelo. They're coming for him. The words echoed in his mind, and he could feel the weight of their meaning. If the Order got to D'Angelo, if they controlled the paintings, the galaxy would be theirs for the taking. The team couldn't allow that to happen. They had to act fast, before it was too late. Everyone, gather your things, Edward said, his voice urgent. We're moving now. We need to get D'Angelo out of here before the Order reaches us. Sophia, always calm under pressure, immediately sprang into action. She accessed a secure channel to the ISC, quickly contacting their contacts to arrange an immediate extraction plan. I'll make the call, she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying a flicker of concern. Tanika, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet since the warning had come through, spoke up. We can't just run and hide. We need to get the message out. The Order can't be allowed to control this information. Edward nodded, his mind racing. We'll need a diversion. We need to draw their attention elsewhere, keep them occupied long enough for D'Angelo to slip away unnoticed. D'Angelo, who had been standing silently in the corner of the room, his face a mixture of anger and confusion, finally spoke up. I don't know what's going on here. All I ever wanted was to paint. Now I'm being chased by a shadowy group who thinks my art can change the galaxy. I don't even know what's real anymore. Edward stepped forward, his expression softening. I know this is overwhelming, but we don't have time to explain everything right now. We need you to trust us, D'Angelo. Your paintings are powerful, but they're also dangerous. You don't understand yet what's at stake. The Order wants to take control of the future, and if they get to you, they'll rewrite it in their image. We can't let that happen. D'Angelo's gaze was conflicted, but something in Edward's words seemed to click. He nodded slowly, a grim look crossing his face. All right. I'll do what I have to do. But I need you to promise me something. What? Edward asked. That we don't let them control what happens next. No one should have the power to shape the future on their own, D'Angelo said firmly, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Edward met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. We promise. The next few hours were a whirlwind of action. The team moved quickly to put their plan into motion. D'Angelo's paintings were carefully packed away, their value immeasurable, but they couldn't afford to be caught with them. The risk of the Order tracking them through the paintings was too great. They needed to keep them hidden, safe, until they could find a way to use them to their advantage. The plan was set in motion. D'Angelo would be taken to a secure location provided by the ISC. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the only one they had. The extraction team would arrive in under an hour, and until then, they had to do everything in their power to stay ahead of the Order. Sophia activated a series of encryption codes on the embassy's systems, masking their movements from any potential surveillance. Tanika, meanwhile, worked on creating a decoy signal, a fake trail that would lead the Order in the wrong direction, buying them precious time. But as the final preparations were being made, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had felt the ripple of danger from the moment they discovered the Order's involvement, but now it was as though the entire galaxy was closing in around them. Something's off, Edward muttered under his breath. They're moving too quickly. The Order's not the only one watching. Sophia glanced up from her terminal, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. What do you mean? There's a pattern here, Edward replied, his mind racing through the details. The Order isn't acting alone. Someone else is involved, someone who wants to see us fail. Tanika, who had been silently monitoring external communications, suddenly spoke up. You're right. I've been tracking the Order's movements, and they're coordinating with a third party. Someone who has a lot of influence in the Council. I think we've got a mole in the system. D'Angelo's expression darkened. A mole? Who? Tanika hesitated. I don't know yet, but they're using their position to funnel information straight to the Order. It's how they found us so quickly. We need to identify them before they can sabotage our plans. Edward clenched his fists. If they've been tracking us from the inside, that means we've been compromised. There's no telling how much they already know. Sophia's voice was calm but firm. We don't have the luxury of time to play it safe anymore. We need to act quickly. The Order is coming for us. Whoever the mole is, we'll deal with them later. Right now, we have to get D'Angelo out of here and into safety. Edward knew she was right, but the weight of the situation pressed down on him. They were on the verge of something monumental, humanity's chance to take its place in the galaxy, to prove that they were more than just a primitive species. But now, as the walls closed in around them, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting not just the Order, but something far bigger, something that had been lurking in the shadows for far longer than they realized. With the plan in motion, there was no turning back. The team had made their choice. They had decided to fight for humanity's future, and they would do whatever it took to ensure that future was shaped by their own hands, not the hands of the Order, not the hands of anyone who believed they had the right to control it. As they prepared to leave the embassy, a sudden alarm blared through the facility. The lights flickered, and a voice crackled through the intercom system. Attention, unauthorized personnel detected. All exits are being sealed. Please remain where you are. Sophia's eyes widened in realization. It's too late. The Order's already here. The alarm blared throughout the embassy, its shrill sound piercing the tension in the air. The walls seemed to close in as the emergency lights flashed red, casting everything in an ominous glow. Edward's heart raced as he looked around at his team, each of them knowing what was coming next. Sophia quickly moved to the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys. The lockdown protocol is already in place. We're trapped. Tanika's eyes darted around, her mind calculating escape routes. Not yet. We've still got a few options left, but we need to move fast. D'Angelo's face was pale, but there was a fire in his eyes. "I'm not going to just sit here and wait for them to come for me," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of defiance and determination. Edward placed a hand on D'Angelo's shoulder, his voice firm. "We're not sitting back. We're fighting. We're not letting them take you, or this future, from us." The team moved quickly, each member falling into their roles. Sophia, despite the lockdown, began rerouting the embassy's security systems, trying to find a way to access an emergency exit. Tanika tapped into the embassy's internal network, searching for any hint of a mole who had been feeding information to the Order. Edward, though, was focused on one thing: D'Angelo. "Stay close to me," Edward said, his eyes scanning the room. "We need to get you to safety, and fast." D'Angelo nodded, though there was still uncertainty in his eyes. "What's the plan?" "We fight," Edward said, the words solidifying in his mind. "If the Order wants us, they'll have to come through us first." Suddenly, the door to the control room slammed open with a force that rattled the walls. Two heavily armed guards from the Order of the Unseen stormed in, their weapons aimed directly at the team. "Don't move," one of the guards barked. His eyes narrowed as he sized up the situation. "D'Angelo Glover. We've been looking for you." Edward moved to stand in front of D'Angelo instinctively, his body a shield. "You'll have to go through me first," he said, his voice cold and resolute. The guard smirked. "That can be arranged." Before the tension could escalate further, a loud crash came from the hallway outside. The doors to the hallway burst open, and a group of ISC soldiers stormed into the control room, weapons raised. They quickly neutralized the two guards, disarming them with swift precision. The leader of the ISC unit, a tall woman with short-cropped hair, surveyed the room. "Get him out of here. Now," she ordered, pointing toward D'Angelo. Sophia had already reached the control panel, bypassing the embassy's internal locks with expert precision. "The exit is open," she called. "We have to move, now." D'Angelo, still in a state of shock, didn't hesitate this time. He followed the ISC soldiers out of the room, with Edward, Sophia, and Tanika close behind. They moved swiftly through the halls, each corner they rounded bringing them closer to their goal, but also to the looming threat of the Order. Edward's mind raced. The Order had known they would try to escape, but this sudden breach meant something else. This was a full-scale attack. The Order was coming for them all, and it wasn't just D'Angelo they were after. The paintings, the future, everything was at risk. "We can't go through the main exit," Tanika said, her voice tense. "It's been compromised. We need to find an alternate route." The ISC soldiers led them to a service corridor, one that was less likely to be monitored. It was tight, dimly lit, and the air was heavy with the tension of their flight. But it was their best shot. "We're almost there," the ISC leader said. "Once we're out of the facility, we'll be able to extract you to a safe location." As they neared the exit, a loud bang echoed through the hallway, followed by the sounds of heavy boots. The Order wasn't far behind. "They've found us," Edward muttered. "We need to make it out now." Tanika and Sophia exchanged a quick glance, each of them knowing the risks. "The ISC will hold them off," Sophia said, her voice steady. "But you need to make sure D'Angelo gets out of here safely." Edward nodded. "We're not losing him now." The doors to the service exit opened, and they found themselves outside in the dark alleyway behind the embassy. The cold night air hit them like a shock, but there was no time to take a breath. The ISC soldiers had positioned themselves to cover their escape, but they were clearly outnumbered. "Go! Go!" the ISC leader shouted, shoving Edward forward. "We'll cover you." D'Angelo, his eyes wide with fear, but also with the understanding that there was no going back, began to move quickly, guided by the soldiers. Edward, Sophia, and Tanika followed, each step feeling like it could be their last. The alley was long, narrow, and filled with shadows, the perfect place for an ambush. Edward kept his eyes scanning the surroundings, knowing that the Order would not let them escape easily. Every step they took brought them closer to safety, but it also meant they were running out of time. As they reached the end of the alley, they saw the lights of the ISC ship awaiting them, the door open and ready for their departure. But before they could reach it, a voice called out from behind them. "Not so fast." Edward's blood ran cold as he turned to see the figure of a man emerging from the darkness. It wasn't a soldier. It was someone much more dangerous. He was tall, with a commanding presence, and his eyes gleamed with an unnerving calm. He wore a dark cloak, and the insignia on his chest was unmistakable. "The order of the unseen will not be denied," the man said, his voice cold as ice. "This is not over." He raised his hand, and at that moment, the ground trembled beneath them. It wasn't just a tremor, it was something far more deliberate. The man was controlling the environment itself, manipulating the space around them. The air felt heavy, and it became harder to breathe as if the very atmosphere was being twisted to his will. Edward stepped in front of D'Angelo, his body tense and ready to fight. "We're not afraid of you." The man's lips curled into a sinister smile. "Fear has nothing to do with it. You are already too late. The future has already been decided." But as he advanced toward them, something changed. D'Angelo, who had been silent until now, suddenly stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the man with an intensity that made the air crackle with energy. "You're wrong," D'Angelo said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable power. "The future isn't decided. Not yet." With that, he raised his hand, and the energy in the air shifted. The world seemed to warp around them, and for a brief moment, it was as if the fabric of time itself was being stretched. The man staggered back, his expression one of disbelief. "Impossible. You underestimated humanity," D'Angelo said softly, his gaze unwavering. "And you underestimated me." In that moment, the tide turned. The order's hold over the future began to crumble, and the team knew one thing for certain: the fight for the galaxy's future was only just beginning.